The rain tapped softly against the old wooden windows of Margaret's house, a gentle rhythm that had accompanied her through decades of loneliness and quiet strength. Inside, the warm glow of a single lamp painted soft shades of amber across her silver-lined hair. She sat in her rocking chair, the one Daniel had carved before he died, and across from her sat her little granddaughter Emily, legs folded, eyes wide, waiting for her grandmother to speak. Emily always sensed there was more behind her grandmother's tired smile, something hidden beneath years of silence and sacrifice. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain, "Mom said you used to be different. Happier. What happened?" Margaret's gentle smile trembled for a moment. "Come closer, dear," she said, patting the blanket over her lap. Emily moved closer, wrapping her tiny fingers around Margaret's weathered hand. Margaret took a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of 3 decades. "Your mother got married last year," she said softly, "and even today, she doesn't know I inherited $7 million. The week before her wedding, Emily's eyes widened instantly. $7 million, Grandma. Why would you keep that a secret?" Margaret looked down at her hands, the same hands that once held her daughter through sickness, fear, heartbreak, and hope. "Because, my child, sometimes silence protects more hearts than the truth ever could." The story she had kept buried began to unfold in her memory like an old film reel, warm in places, painful in others. She remembered the days when life was simple but full when her husband Daniel was still alive. He worked long shifts in construction, often coming home with dirt on his boots but a smile on his face. Margaret worked at the small-town library, a place filled with stories she admired but never imagined her own life would become one of the hardest to tell. Money was always tight, but love was everywhere. Their daughter Lily grew up in a home full of warmth even when the electricity bill threatened to go unpaid. Daniel used to lift Lily onto his shoulders and say, "One day you'll go farther than both of us," but life was cruel in its timing. Daniel died suddenly from a heart attack at 41, and the world Margaret knew collapsed overnight. She became mother and father, guardian and warrior, comforter and provider. To keep food on the table, she worked anywhere anyone would hire her, cleaning offices after sunset, babysitting late into the night, shelving books until her back ached, even doing night shifts at a factory that smelled of metal and solitude. She slept when she could, often at odd hours, always lightly, in case Lily needed her. But despite the hardship, Lily never missed a school trip, never went without new shoes, never felt hunger, not even once. Margaret made sure of that. Lily never saw her mother silently crying into a dish towel at midnight, wondering how to stretch $20 into a week of meals. She never knew the sacrifices carved deep into her mother's bones, but as Lily grew older, the world widened, and the distance between them grew without either of them noticing at first. Lily began to see her mother as old-fashioned, to simple, to cautious. "Mom, I want a life different from yours," she said at 18, and she meant it. She left for New York City, chasing a life of lights and noise, leaving her mother behind in their quiet town. Calls became monthly. Visits became yearly. Margaret never complained. She simply prayed her daughter was safe, warm, happy. But when Lily did visit, her words were sharper, thinner, almost embarrassed. "Mom, why do you still live here? You never think big. If you'd taken more risks, maybe life would have been easier." She didn't say it to be cruel, but she didn't realize how deep those words pierced the woman who had given everything so she could dream freely. Then came the week before Lily's wedding. Margaret received a letter from a lawyer, a letter she almost threw away, assuming it was another scam or advertisement. But inside were documents that made her hands tremble. Her estranged sister, whom she hadn't spoken to in decades, had died. And for reasons Margaret would never know, she left everything she owned to her: land, stocks, a business, properties valued at $7 million. Margaret stared at the papers as if they were written in another language. $7 million. Enough to change her life. Enough to change Lily's life. Enough to erase every hardship she had ever endured. Her first instinct was to call Lily, to tell her she would help pay for the wedding, the house, anything. But before she could even decide, Lily called her, only not with love or excitement. Instead, her voice was stiff, embarrassed, almost rehearsed. "Mom, please don't wear your old dresses at the wedding. It's embarrassing, and don't talk too much to his family. Just be simple, okay? Please don't cry in front of everyone. It looks weak, Mom. And don't mention money or anything like that. They already think you're plain." Margaret listened quietly, the inheritance papers still trembling in her hand. Her daughter wasn't ashamed of poverty, she was ashamed of her mother. That night, Margaret sat alone at her dining table, running her fingers along the old wooden surface Daniel built by hand. She imagined telling Lily the truth. She imagined Lily's sudden kindness, sudden need for closeness, the sudden warmth that would come not from love, but from opportunity. "No," she whispered to herself. "Not like this." She folded the papers carefully and placed them in her drawer. She would keep the secret not out of spite, but out of love. She wanted Lily to love her for who she was, not for what she suddenly had. The morning of the wedding arrived with a pale, fragile sunlight that filtered weakly through the curtains of Margaret's small kitchen. She stood by the counter, her old kettle whistling softly, but her mind was far away somewhere between the memory of Daniel's laughter and the ache of Lily's cold words the night before. She brewed her tea slowly, her hand slightly unsteady, not from age, but from the quiet heartbreak that had settled deep inside her chest. She had spent all night staring at the folded inheritance documents locked away in her drawer, wondering whether she should tell Lily, wondering whether keeping it hidden made her a coward or a mother who still believed love was worth protecting. When she finally slipped into the simple pale blue dress she planned to wear, one Lily had mocked as to small town, she paused in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at her wasn't just old. She was tired. She was worn from decades of sacrifice, worry, and unspoken grief. And yet, beneath it all, there was a softness in her eyes. Something Lily had long stopped seeing, something that came from surviving storms Lily never knew existed. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, clutching her purse, waiting for a text, a call, any sign from Lily asking if she needed help getting to the wedding venue. None came. The silence was loud. The clock ticked. The air shifted. Finally, her phone buzzed. A message from Lily. For a moment, Margaret smiled, thinking maybe her daughter was checking on her. But the message was short, sharp, and cold. "Mom, don't come early. Just come right at start time. And don't talk to people too much." Margaret stared at the screen, feeling something inside her sink. Not even a "love you," not even a "thank you," not even a "can't wait to see you." She set the phone down carefully, as though the words themselves were fragile enough to shatter in her hands. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual. Margaret's feet moved slowly, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes, her breath forming soft clouds in the crisp morning air. As she stood waiting for the bus that would carry her to her daughter's big day, she replayed memories of Lily as a little girl, running through fields with wild flowers tangled in her hair, falling asleep on Margaret's chest on cold winter nights, asking endless questions about the moon, the stars, the world. "Mom, will you always be with me?" she had once asked with the innocence only children possess. Margaret remembered cupping her small face and whispering, "Always, my love. Even if you can't see me, I'm there." She wondered now if that promise had stretched too thin over the years. Lost somewhere in the space between them, the bus doors swung open with a metallic gasp, and Margaret stepped inside, clutching the handle as she found a seat near the window. Outside, the world moved in gentle blurred trees, street signs, houses, each one holding decades of memories she wished she could revisit. She kept imagining Lily at the altar, radiant, grown, ready for a new chapter. She imagined herself standing quietly in the back, unnoticed, unimportant, but still present. A mother's love rarely demanded applause. It simply asked for a place in the room. But Lily had made it clear Margaret's place was conditional. As she neared the wedding venue, a large church decorated with white roses and shimmering ribbons, Margaret felt her stomach twist. She stepped off the bus and stood there for a moment, staring at the grand entrance. Guests were arriving in elegant dresses and tailored suits. Families hugged, laughed, took pictures. Margaret began walking toward the door when she heard her name. Not warmly, not kindly, but in a tone that made her freeze. It was Lily's soon-to-be mother-in-law. "Oh, you're her mother," the woman said, looking Margaret up and down as if she were inspecting a stain. "You should probably enter through the side door. The front is for immediate family." The word slapped Margaret harder than any physical blow. Immediate family. As if she was something else. Something lesser. Margaret felt her throat tighten painfully, but she nodded politely, whispering, "Of course," even though every part of her wanted to cry. She made her way toward the side entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway inside was dim and quiet, far from the warmth and celebration happening only a few walls away. She could hear laughter echoing in the main hall, Lily's fiancé greeting guests, Lily herself fussing over last-minute details. No one came to look for her. No one asked if she had arrived. No one cared. Margaret sat on a small wooden bench, smoothing out the wrinkles in her dress, trying her best not to let her emotions overwhelm her. She told herself she was here for Lily, not for herself. She told herself that mothers weren't meant to be celebrated, they were meant to endure. But then she overheard something that broke her in a way nothing else ever had. Two bridesmaids walked by the hallway whispering. "Did you hear? Lily told everyone her mom might embarrass her. She said she's, not very polished." The girls laughed gently, not realizing Margaret was right around the corner hearing every word. Not polished. Not polished. The words echoed inside her like stones thrown at a cracked window. She felt tears burning behind her eyes. Her breath grew shaky. She clutched her purse so tightly her fingers turned pale. She didn't belong here. Not in Lily's new life. Not in this world where appearances mattered more than the woman who had raised her. She stood up slowly, hands trembling. She walked toward the exit, and before anyone could notice she had come or gone, Margaret slipped out the church doors and into the bright sunlight, her shadow stretching long behind her like a memory that no longer had a place in the present. She walked all the way back to the bus stop, tears falling silently, blending with the soft wind. The inheritance papers, the harsh words, the years of distance, they all floated through her mind in a painful storm. She sat on the bench and whispered to herself, "She doesn't need to know, not yet, maybe not ever." And as the bus returned to carry her home alone on her daughter's wedding day, she knew something inside her had changed forever. The ride back home felt longer than the journey to the church, as though the universe itself had slowed just enough to force Margaret to sit with her pain. She stared out the window, watching the world pass in muted colors, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. Her eyes looked swollen, tired, older than they had that morning. She wondered what the guests at the wedding were doing at that very moment, perhaps taking pictures, raising toasts, dancing under chandeliers. She wondered if Lily had even noticed her absence. A strange calm settled over Margaret as the bus rattled on. Not the calm of peace, but the numb quiet that comes after a storm too heavy to fight. The kind of stillness that feels like surrender. When she stepped off the bus near her small home, the street was empty, the air unmoving. The world indifferent to the heartbreak she carried back with her. She unlocked her door slowly, stepped inside, and closed it behind her with a soft click that felt heavier than it should. The house was silent, dim, untouched. In that silence, the memory of Lily as a little girl drifted in, running into the kitchen with scraped knees, crying because kids at school had teased her. Margaret had wrapped her in her arms, whispering, "You are strong, my love. You are worthy. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Funny, she thought, how life circles back. How the same words she once said to comfort her daughter were now the words she desperately needed to hear. Herself, Margaret took off her shoes and walked to the small drawer where she kept the inheritance documents. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open. The folder sat there thick, official, heavy with a fortune she never asked for, but received anyway when her late sister left her everything. $7 million. More than Margaret had ever imagined touching. Money that could change lives. Money that could build futures. Money that Lily didn't even know existed. She picked up the folder and held it to her chest, her breath hitching as tears threatened again. She had planned to tell Lily after the wedding, had imagined the moment 100 times, how Lily would cry, hug her, thank her, maybe finally soften the walls between them. But today had shown her a truth she couldn't ignore. Love that must be earned through money wasn't love at all. She placed the documents on the table gently, as though they were fragile living things. Then she sat down and stared at them for a long time, battling the ache inside her. Her mind drifted to the early years, those long nights she stayed awake sewing clothes for extra income. The mornings she skipped breakfast so Lily never had to. The birthdays she made magical with pennies and creativity. She had given Lily everything she could, piece by piece, year after year, until there was nothing left to give, but still, somehow, it had never been enough. And now here she was, holding the greatest gift she could ever offer, realizing she no longer knew whether her daughter deserved it. Hours passed in still silence as sunlight melted into dusk. Margaret didn't move. She simply sat, thinking, drifting in memories of what motherhood once felt like. At one point she picked up her phone, considered calling Lily, considered apologizing for a crime she hadn't even committed, existing in a way her daughter found embarrassing. But her hands froze. Her heart stopped her. She set the phone down again. She couldn't chase affection anymore. She couldn't bend herself into shapes that made others comfortable. Not today. Not after this. As night finally wrapped itself around the house, Margaret lit a small lamp in the corner. Its warm light spilled onto the table, illuminating the inheritance papers like a secret waiting to be spoken. She whispered into the quiet room, "Maybe one day. Maybe she'll understand. Maybe she'll come back." Her voice trembled, soft and hopeful despite everything. She wasn't angry, not truly. She was hurt, but beneath the pain lived a well of love so deep it defied logic. That was the curse of mothers, she thought. They forgave even when they weren't asked to. She stood up slowly, carried the inheritance folder back to the drawer, and tucked it away again, deeper this time, farther from reach. Then she walked to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the moon hung low, pale, serene, the same moon she used to show Lily years ago through that same window. "Look," she had said back then, holding her daughter close, "no matter where you go, this same moon will shine on us both tonight." Margaret wondered if Lily would even remember that, and as she watched the moonlight spill across her quiet lawn, Margaret made a silent promise to herself, not out of pride, Not out of revenge, but out of a slow, painful realization. She would not tell Lily about the inheritance. Not yet. Not until her daughter came to her not as someone ashamed or inconvenienced, but as a daughter who remembered love. A daughter who came without expectation. That would be the day Margaret would speak. But until then, she would wait, alone, patiently, maybe foolishly, but with a mother's heart that refused to close completely, even when wounded. The next morning arrived wrapped in a soft, cold silence, the kind that makes a house feel both peaceful and haunted. I woke before sunrise, the old ache in my hip reminding me that age is no polite visitor. It settles in and makes itself comfortable. As I moved through the kitchen, preparing tea, I felt the weight of everything that had been said the night before, the inheritance, my fears, my daughter's choices, and the quiet guilt that had lived inside me for years. Sometimes blessings arrive looking like burdens, and burdens sometimes reveal themselves as hidden blessings. That morning, I wasn't yet sure which category $7 million belonged to. I looked out the window as the sky slowly shifted from black to lavender, and for a moment I imagined the young woman I had once been, bold, stubborn, chasing dreams with empty pockets but a full heart. She would have laughed at the idea of such wealth. She would have run barefoot in the yard, shouting her good fortune to the sky. But the woman I had become simply breathed slowly, holding her teacup with hands that had held too many truths for too long, and wondered what kind of future I could shape for the daughter I still loved more than my own breath. Later that day, as I folded some linens, I heard the soft hum of my phone vibrating against the wooden counter. It was an unknown number, but something urged me to answer. A woman with a calm, gentle voice introduced herself as the attorney who had handled my cousin Margaret's estate. She apologized for the intrusion, but explained that there were additional documents I needed to review, something about assets Margaret had added to her trust before she passed. For a moment my breath caught, and I felt that unsettling mix of sorrow and gratitude again. Margaret had always been the quiet type, the kind who loved fiercely but silently. We had not been close in the final years of her life, separated by distance and the busyness of living, but she apparently had thought of me with a tenderness I had not expected. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall, letting the truth settle in. My life had changed, drastically, yet everything around me still looked the same. The curtain swayed softly. The clock ticked. My daughter lived her life unaware of what had fallen into mine, and I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, God had handed me this not as a reward, but as a responsibility. That evening the house felt unusually quiet, even though nothing about it had changed. The air seemed heavier, the memories louder. I found myself walking room to room, touching the simple things I had collected over the years, an old photograph frame, a chipped vase, a handmade quilt, each item holding pieces of who I had been before life hardened me. My daughter's laughter echoed faintly from one memory to the next, a ghost that lived in the corners of my home. I paused at her old room, still painted the soft color she had chosen at 12, still holding traces of her childhood dreams. Standing there, I realized something painful but true. I had spent years trying to protect her from disappointment, heartbreak, struggle, but I had forgotten that love is not protection. Love is presence. Love is truth. And somewhere along the way, my fear of losing her had caused me to hide too much. The truth unraveled further days later when she called me late in the evening. Her voice shaky but trying to sound steady. She said she missed me. She said the house felt empty lately. She said marriage was turning out to be harder than she expected, and there were moments she wished she could come home just to breathe. I listened quietly, letting her speak without interruption, though every word tugged at me. I wanted to tell her everything, about the inheritance, about my fears, about the guilt I had been holding onto. But something inside me whispered, not yet. She wasn't calling for money. She wasn't calling for answers. She was calling for her mother. And for the first time in a long while, I felt myself becoming that mother again. But the peace did not last. Life has a way of throwing shadows across even the softest of days. A week later, I learned from a neighbor that my daughter and her husband had been arguing frequently, loud enough for others to worry. I drove to their house without calling, my heart pounding the entire way. When I arrived, I saw her sitting alone on the porch steps, shoulders shaking, eyes red and swollen. She tried to force a smile, tried to hide the pain, but there are things a mother never fails to notice. I sat beside her quietly, the way she had sat beside me as a child when I was upset, and after a while she leaned her head onto my shoulder. The world went still. Her voice trembled as she told me her husband had been pressuring her about finances, telling her she didn't contribute enough, blaming her for things she had no control over. I felt anger rise inside me, a fierce, protective anger, but I held it back, choosing instead to listen until she had nothing more to say. Then I wrapped my arm around her and let her cry the way she used to before she grew up and learned to hide her tears driving home that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that the inheritance was no longer just mine. It was a tool, a bridge, a lifeline, something that could reshape her world if used wisely. But I also remembered the words of a pastor I once knew, who had said, "Money reveals the heart more than it changes it." I knew I could not simply hand her the truth without preparing her. I knew she needed strength, healing, clarity, not a sudden flood of wealth that could complicate fragile things. So I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of rushing to reveal everything, I would slowly create a path for her to rise on her own, with dignity and confidence, until the inheritance became not a rescue, but a blessing she could handle with wisdom. That night, after locking the doors and turning off the kitchen lights, I stood in the middle of my small living room and whispered a prayer, not for wealth, not for answers, but for guidance. I asked God to help me do right by my daughter, to help me heal what years of silence had broken, to help me step into the mother I once was before life exhausted me. And for the first time since the inheritance had entered my life, I felt a gentle peace, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and tells you you're not walking alone. I went to bed with tears drying on my cheeks and hope settling like soft dust across my heart, uncertain of the future, but ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, a strange stillness settled over my life, the kind that feels like the quiet between two storms. I moved through my home gently, touching things as if they might crumble under too much pressure. Every object seemed to whisper memories, my daughter's drawings pinned crookedly on the refrigerator, the wooden spoon I had used for decades, the worn-out armchair where I had once held her when she was feverish and trembling. These memories drifted through my mind like soft echoes, reminding me that time does not move in straight lines. It coils, wanders, loops back, reminding you of who you were at the very moment you are trying to figure out who you are becoming. I thought often of the inheritance, not as a windfall, not as a ticket to freedom, but as a responsibility laid gently and heavily onto my shoulders. And each night, before I slept, I whispered the same question into the darkness. God, what do you want me to do with this? But answers do not always come as voices. Sometimes they come as moments, as people, as choices that rise quietly from the ordinary. One evening, as orange twilight poured through the kitchen window, I received a call that made my heart tighten. It was my daughter again, but her voice was not shaky this time. It was hollow in a way that frightened me more. She asked if she could come over. She said she needed space to breathe. Without hesitation, I told her the door would be unlocked. When she arrived, she looked so small, so fragile, like the world had drained the color from her. She placed her bag down, sat at the table where she used to do her homework as a little girl, and held her head in her hands. I sat across from her, watching her chest rise and fall unevenly, and waited. It didn't take long before she finally whispered that she was thinking of leaving her husband. Not because she didn't love him anymore, she said, but because she was tired of feeling like she wasn't enough. Tired of being blamed. Tired of being talked down to. Tired of living with a man who thought money gave him power over her. As she spoke, I felt the old protective fire rise in me again, the same fire that had lived inside me the day she was born, the day she fell off her bike, the day she left for college, the day she had cried in my arms as a teenager. I wanted to take away every pain, every doubt, every bruise left on her spirit. But I knew that life does not allow mothers to shield their children forever. All we can do is stand beside them when their world begins to crack. I reached across the table and took her hand, her fingers ice cold, her pulse trembling. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of her younger self, eyes filled with questions she was afraid to ask. I squeezed her hand gently and told her she was not alone, that she had strength she had forgotten, that she deserved respect and kindness and peace. And for the first time in a long time, she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was a child scared of thunderstorms. That night she stayed with me. We didn't talk much after dinner. We simply existed in the same quiet space, two women stitched together by blood and wounds and love. While she slept in her old room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the inheritance again. $7 million. A number that could rebuild her life, but also a number that could destroy her marriage instantly if revealed at the wrong moment. I thought of Margaret, my cousin, imagining her somewhere beyond this world, watching me struggle with the gift she had left behind. I wondered if she had known how complicated such generosity could be. I wondered if she had chosen me because she trusted my heart more than I trusted it myself. And I realized something then, something that settled into my bones like truth finally finding a home. The inheritance was not meant to be hidden forever. It was meant to be revealed at the right moment, in the right way, when it could heal instead of harm. But life is not generous with perfect timing. 2 days later, my daughter's husband showed up at my door. His face flushed with anger, his eyes stormy with accusation. He demanded to know why she wasn't answering his calls, why she wasn't home, why I was interfering in their marriage. I stood in the doorway, small but unshaken, and told him calmly that she was safe and needed time. He scoffed, tried to push past me, but something in my gaze must have stopped him because he stepped back. He spoke quickly, words sharp and frantic, telling me that she had responsibilities, that she was overreacting, that all couples fight. I listened, but his tone reminded me of men I had known in my youth, men who believed their control was love, men who believed raising their voice was the same as being right. When he finally left, furious and defeated, I closed the door gently and locked it. My hands trembled afterward, but not from fear, from the certainty that my daughter had to reclaim her life, with or without him. That night, she made her decision. Through tears and long silences, she said she wanted to separate. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she could not return to a home where she felt smaller every day. I held her hands and told her I was proud of her, proud not because she was leaving, but because she was choosing herself, choosing peace, choosing dignity. And though she didn't know it, I had already begun to make plans in my mind. A new place for her to stay, a small financial cushion disguised as savings I had quietly put away. And one day, when she was healed and steady, the truth about the inheritance. As the house grew quiet again that night, I found myself standing at the window watching the moon rise slowly over the darkened street. The world looked peaceful, but I knew storms were still circling our lives. Yet for the first time, I also felt a strange steadiness, a certainty that maybe, just maybe, everything was happening the way it needed to. Maybe the inheritance was not a secret weighing me down, but a promise waiting patiently for the right moment. And maybe, in the end, love was less about shielding someone from pain and more about walking beside them through every valley until they found their way back into the light. The days that followed felt like the soft unwinding of a life that had been tightly knotted for years. The kind of unraveling that doesn't happen with one sudden tug but slowly, gently, with moments of painful honesty and moments of unexpected peace. My daughter began her search for a small place to live, stopping by listings and returning home with a tired but determined look on her face. I watched her rediscover herself piece by piece, sometimes quietly folding laundry in the living room while sunlight warmed her hair, sometimes staring out the window with the expression of someone learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. I cooked for her, walked with her, listened when her voice broke mid-sentence, and held her when she cried for the life she thought she would have, for the love she believed would protect her, for the years she had given to a man who treated her heart like something disposable. And yet, even in her grief, I saw sparks of strength returning to her, like glowing embers waiting to rise again. Sometimes, late at night, she would come sit beside me on the couch, resting her head against my shoulder without saying a word. And those moments felt like a quiet blessing, a reminder that even when the world feels unbearably heavy, love can still create small, warm pockets of safety. Her husband called less frequently after a while, the loud desperation in his voice shifting into a cold, distant tone that told me his pride was beginning to crack. But pride, I had learned long ago, is a fragile fortress. One truth spoken at the right time can shatter its walls. And that truth arrived one late afternoon when my daughter was out viewing an apartment, and I found him pacing outside my front door. His face was pale, his eyes uneasy, his words uncertain. He said he wanted to talk. For a moment, I considered turning him away, but something in his expression, something tired, defeated, made me step outside. He confessed, in a quiet voice, that he never meant to hurt her, that he didn't realize how much pressure he put on her, that he had grown up believing control was love, because that was what he had seen in his own father. He rubbed his eyes with shaking hands, admitting that he was ashamed, that he didn't know how to fix things. And as I listened, I felt no anger, only a deep, heavy sadness. Life creates people out of the wounds they never healed. I told him the truth gently, that love without respect is not love at all, that my daughter deserved tenderness and peace, and that he needed to find the courage to confront the shadows inside him if he hoped to build a life worth sharing with anyone. He nodded slowly, tears slipping down his face, and for a moment he looked like a lost boy rather than a grown man. But when he asked if my daughter still loved him, I said the words I knew he wasn't ready to hear. She loves herself more now. And that is good. That night my daughter returned home exhausted, and I made her tea while she told me she had finally found a place she liked, small, bright, with windows that let in the sunrise. She talked about it with a hopeful softness in her eyes, a softness I hadn't seen in years. I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet click, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding seamlessly into place. And that was when I knew it was time. After she finished her tea and rested her head against the back of the couch, I sat down beside her and took her hand. She looked at me curiously when I told her there was something important I had been waiting to share, something that had remained hidden because the timing had never been right. And so, in the dim glow of the lamp, and the stillness of the room, I told her the truth about the inheritance, the $7 million, the unexpected gift, the responsibility I had carried alone. At first she stared at me silently, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then tears filled her eyes, not the heavy, painful kind, but the stunned, overflowing kind that come when a person realizes that life, even in its cruelty, can still offer miracles. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. She wasn't angry that I had kept it from her. She wasn't even shocked by the number. She was emotional because she understood why I had waited. Because she realized I trusted her strength more than she trusted it herself. Because she saw that the inheritance was not a weapon to destroy her marriage, but a foundation to rebuild her life. She leaned into me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders, her tears warm against my neck as she whispered, "Mom, I don't deserve this." I held her tighter, telling her she deserved more than she ever received, more than she ever asked for, more than she ever allowed herself to believe. And in that moment, with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of cars passing outside, something inside both of us healed, not all at once, but enough to breathe again. The next weeks moved like the gentle pages of a chapter closing on its own. We packed her belongings carefully, deciding what belonged in her new life and what could be left behind. She signed the lease on her apartment with shaky but excited hands, and I watched her step into the small living room for the first time, sunlight pouring over her like a blessing. We cleaned, we organized, we laughed unexpectedly at memories that surfaced from old boxes, her childhood sneakers, letters she had written to me from summer camp, photos of us from years when life felt simpler. She settled into the space with surprising ease, as though her soul recognized it before she did. And though there were moments when sadness visited her, in the quiet hours, in the spaces where her husband's presence had once lingered, she faced each wave with courage, letting it wash over her without letting it drown her. As for me, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. The weight of the secret was gone. The fear for her future was easing. And the inheritance, once a silent burden, had become a bridge, leading her toward a life shaped not by fear or compromise, but by choice, by strength, by hope. Sometimes she stayed the night with me. Sometimes I visited her new home and sat by her window as she talked about plans and possibilities with a soft glow in her voice. And one evening, as we watched the city lights flicker in the distance, she said something that caught me completely off guard. "Mom, maybe someday I'll be strong enough to forgive him." Not for him, but for me. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Healing, I knew then, is not the act of forgetting pain, but the act of reclaiming yourself from it. And so life continued, not perfect, not painless, but beautifully, quietly hopeful. My daughter was becoming the woman she had always been meant to be, and I, in the soft twilight of my own years, found peace in knowing I had given her everything I could, my love, my courage, and finally, the truth that had waited patiently for its time. The inheritance did not change who she was. It simply allowed her to become who she had always deserved to be. And sometimes, when the evening light slips into my living room just right, I sit back, close my eyes, and thank God for the strange, winding ways He answers prayers, not always quickly, not always clearly, but always with purpose.